In this video, I'm going to show how we create an asset specification in the CMMS system. Now, asset specifications are very useful, and I'm going to start out showing Sedaru Fieldforce and showing an existing specification that I've already built. In this case, I happen to be on the Sun Terrace pump station selected, and I have the hierarchy up for view. I'm going to go into the pump assemblies, go into pump assembly 1, and select the motor. Now we're seeing the specification for the motor. It gives us our asset number, our ID location that it's in service, and then specific information about the motor, how many amps, what the frame type is, horsepower, manufacturer, etc. So these specifications are available for any user to select the asset and see some basic information about the asset before they ever go into the field. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to how we create these specifications if we need a new one. So I'm going to start with the current vehicle log. And you can see the vehicle log has some information here that we are currently tracking via spreadsheet, a vehicle number, some different typing selections here, model, year, make, so on and so forth. So from this spreadsheet, I first start designing and deciding which of these columns need to make it to my specification. And in this case, I've already looked at this data and I've decided some of this will make the specification and some of it will not. And I've created another tab for this to kind of keep track of what I'm going to create. So I basically say what the specification field is going to be named, and then I start determining whether it's going to be an alphanumeric asset type, if it's going to be hooked to a domain, which is a pick list, whether it's going to be a date time or a numeric, so forth and so on. So you can see I have a number of fields here I'm going to create, and I've already determined whether or not they're going to be alphanumerics or domains, and most of them are alphanumeric domains. I don't have any numbers here or date time data types. So then I log into Maximo and I'll go to the domain section, and I'll just show you that I've already created the domains. The domains are the pick lists. So in this case, for instance, I'll go into the make. I went through that spreadsheet and I made a list of all of the different makes that we have in there and created a pick list for those makes. You can see here there's 119, and just to ensure that they show up alphabetically, I went ahead and gave it a prefix, a 3-digit prefix, so that it'll make sure to put them in exactly the order I want them to be in. And then I've just gone through here and named the domain. So our naming convention is CCWD _ and then the name of the domain. In this case, it's fleet make. And then the long description is CCWD fleet make pick list. It's an alphanumeric domain. The default length is 50. You can shorten this up if you want to. I just typically leave it at 50. And then to add the rows here, you just hit new row. The new row will come up. And in this case, if we wanted to add entry 120, and I normally go all capitals, right? So I give it a name of 120, make of vehicle, and then I copy that down into the long description as well. If I hit OK, it would actually add this, and I'm not going to hit OK because I don't want to add it. So you can just keep adding as many of these rows as you need for your pick list. This is a very robust pick list at 119 entries. Typically, your pick list is going to be much smaller. In this case, here's the fuel type pick list, which is just gas or diesel. So you just have the two choices. But I just wanted to show that I've already made a number of the domains that I'm going to need, and they're already here ready for use. Next, I'm going to go into the classifications. And we'll just look at some specifications that I've already made. So here's the motor spec we were just looking at in Fieldforce. So you can see, I give it a name, a long description name, a classification path. And then we want to make sure that we use with object asset, because we want to use this domain with our assets. The rest of these are default in there. So we just got to make sure that asset is in there. If it's not, we hit new row and we add it. And then here's our list of attributes. So these are all the attributes we saw here, like amps, frame type, so forth. These are all here, amps, frame type, and you can see the data type here, or if there's a domain on it. So I always start out here and I look at an existing specification that I made, just so I can sort of reorient myself in terms of like naming convention, what the parent classification is. So, where we're storing these, and just make sure I kind of have that fresh in my mind before I start. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the new classification. I'm going to call this fleet spec. It'll tell me that fleet spec is not a valid classification. Would you like to add it? Yes, that's what I'm trying to do, is add it. So we're going to call this fleet specification. And then here we're going to select the parent classification, and I'm going to do this drill down. Maintenance. And asset specifications. There we go. So here's all of my specifications. So I'm going to hit the blue box right next to asset specifications to put it in the same level as the rest of these. Right. So that'll give me that. I'll take my description, add it here for the classification path long name. I can just make it the same as what's up there. And I'm going to hit save. So that I'll check here and make sure that use with object asset is there, and it is. So that's fine. That's exactly what we want. And then I'll start adding my attributes. So referring back to my attributes here, my spreadsheet, I'm going to want vehicle number, right? Which corresponds with this fleet vehicle number. That's what I want to call it. So let's hit a new row here on the attributes. We'll call this fleet VEH num. I'll hit tab. It'll come up and say this question mark just means that there's an issue. If you click on it, it'll tell you what the issue is. This is not a valid attribute. Would you like to add it? Yes, I want to add it. So we're going to call this fleet vehicle number. And this is an ALN type. And I'm going to save that. And again, this is why I use this for reference. So the next one's going to be fleet type 1, and it's going to be a domain. So I'm going to hit new row. I'll say type 1, tab over. It'll give me the question mark again, ask me if I want to add it. I do. This is fleet type 1. The data type's ALN, and then the domain, you'll see that because I named all of the domains, CCWD fleet, and then which pick list it is, just using the description fleet here will give me everything that includes the word fleet in it. And here's my CCWD fleet type 1. So now you can see that this attribute is an ALN type and connected to fleet type 1. So I'm going to go ahead and save this just to show you what happens here. So the attributes will always be listed in alphabetical order, regardless of what order we originally put them in. This icon here, if we click it, will show us the actual sequence order. So in this case, although fleet type 1 is alphabetically in the number 1 slot, the sequence is number 2 versus fleet vehicle number is number 1. So what that does is the sequence in which these display. So amps would be sequence 1, frame would be sequence 2, horsepower is sequence 3, even though from an alphabetical standpoint, that might not be how they display. So let's drop that away. Go back to my reference document. We'll do fleet type 2, fleet type 3. So I'm going to go ahead and set a new row. Tab over, say yes, we want to add it. Fleet type 2. This is an ALN. Do a search, fleet. There's our fleet type 2. Now you can do several of these before you save if you want to. I typically hit save each time. It's just one extra click. If I get interrupted with a phone call, I lose power to the computer, anything goes haywire, I don't lose that much data entry. Fleet type 3. Instead of typing in ALN, I just hit the magnifying glass here to open up the value so you can see what's in here. It's the alphanumeric, it's date, time, table value, which I've never used, and numeric. In this case, it'll be ALN again. And we'll go and use the pick list for fleet type 3. Going back to our list. Now I want to do make, model, and year. So I can see make is a domain, but the model is just alphanumeric. So it's just going to be a free-form typing field. Same thing with the year. I could have made this numeric, but the system, when you put in a number, it automatically puts in a decimal place for the tenths. So rather than saying that this is a 2011.0, I'll just make it an ALN so they could just freeform in, the vehicles of 2011 or a 2015 or a 2021 without having that that decimal place. So we'll do make, model, year. So fleet make. And it's good practice to never put any spaces in here. It's just easier on the system. This will be an ALN. And this one will have a domain. Here's our fleet make. Model. Say yes, go ahead and add that. And in this case, we'll put ALN, but we won't put a pick list, just so that the models, I don't have a pick list for the model. There's sometimes if the pick list is going to be so varied, it's easier to just leave it as an ALN. And fleet year. We'll leave this one as an ALN as well. So we're already down to VIN. Again, it's an ALN, fleet ID tag, and fleet license. So let's say in num. Let's add that. VIN number, ALN. ID tag and license. license. All right, so you'll notice I added 3 of them now without hitting save. So I'll hit save now and just make sure that we save our progress. So we got location, section, those are both domains. So let's do those. Row. And we'll go back to our pick list, find our domain for location. And section. Okay, we'll save that. All right, so we got fleet unit number and then bit smoke smog. Oh, and you'll see these domain yes no. The reason I did that is because there's already a yes no domain created, and it's, you know, I didn't embed the word fleet in it, so this is just a reminder that this is the domain I intended to use. So let's go fleet unit and fleet bit. It's just saying this is the fleet bit program question mark, just saying like, is this vehicle in the bit program? So I'll come in here and here's our CCWD yes no pick list. So I'll use that. Save it. Right, so that's we're down here to bit. So we got smoke, smog, crane. As you can see, these start going pretty fast, particularly if you've done the work ahead of time to lay out what it is you're trying to build. It helps to have these domains already created. All right, back to our list. So we did smoke, smog. All right, we need crane. So basically we're just asking, is there a crane on this unit? Because if there is, then it's, you know what? Let's say crane program, just to kind of keep it in line with how we were asking the other ones. Like, is this in a crane program? Obviously, if there's no crane installed, it wouldn't be in the crane program. So I'll go ahead and do it that way. Fuel key and fuel. Yeah, I'm going to put the ALN because I don't want the decimal place on this. And field type. And we'll use that domain. So now I've created the specification in the classifications. I've made a field for all of this data. So all that exists, right? And here's my classification name. All that data exists. There's 19 fields. Have pick lists for it. So now I'm going to go to the assets module. And I'm going to search for assets by type, and I'm going to look for fleet assets and get a list of fleet assets here. So let's take vehicle 035. All right, so we'll go back here. Oops. We'll go here. I'm going to go to vehicle 035. Right, let's take this over to my sheet, my secondary tab. I don't like that. We'll stay here. Okay, so this is the data we'll enter. So under the asset, you can see I'm on a V035. I'm going to go to specifications and then classify this, right? So I'm going to go ahead and classify this, and I'll drill down my classifications. And here's where I put the fleet specification, right? And it's going to bring in all of this data, right? So now I can start populating this data, right? So the fleet number is 035. The fleet type, let's go ahead and look on the vehicle log. It says utility. Let's see. So I did not put utility in here. So in this case, we'll just look at what our, so I simplified those pick lists, right? So things were in there a bunch of different ways. So I went ahead and simplified the pick list. So not all of the data will be a one-to-one. So I'll look at what my choices are here. You know, it's not a chipper truck or a club cart. You know, it's none of these on page one. It's not a light tower man lift. It's not a pickup truck. So we're going to go ahead and put it under sedan. And it is. It's actually an SUV, but we'll go ahead and put it under sedan. Fleet type 2 is null. Fleet type 3 is null. Make is a Ford, so it's a Ford Escape hybrid. So under make, now this is why we did it in such a way that, you know, putting the number prefix there, just so that we could make sure that we forced it into alphabetical order. And this one, so there's no pick list here. If I go to the pick list, there's nothing here because this is just an ALN. So I can put Escape hybrid 4x4. Let's find the year. In this case, it's a 2010. So you can see how, and I'll stop right there for the sake of this video and hit save, right? So it'll save all of this information. So you can go through and populate your spec template, right? This is where the classification is basically the blank template. So for each one of the assets, you can put the template on there and then populate the data. And then this will be what drives your specification in the Sedaru software. So you'll see this. So these, I did the same thing. I went to this motor asset in Maximo. I used that classification on the specification tab, and then I populated the data from a spreadsheet where we had this data recorded, and now it shows here. So once I'm done populating this data, the system will run its batch processing tonight. Both the Maximo system and the Sedaru systems will update their schemas and build this specification and start displaying this specification for us in the software. For Maximo, it goes in automatically. As soon as we put it in, it's there. But to actually show up in Fieldforce, that data transfer and batching has to happen at night. So starting tomorrow, if I were to pull up vehicle 035, I'm going to see the classification that I just put against it and any of the data that I have populated into that classification. If I don't populate data, you're going to see like this NEBA design, like the field will be there, but the data is blank. There's nothing in it. So if I were to stop right now, we would end up seeing that it's vehicle 035. It's a sedan, it's a Ford Escape Hybrid 2010. Everything else would be blank, which is fine. It just goes to show sometimes we have all of the data, sometimes we don't, but we put in the data that we have because there's a container for it. And that concludes how to create a specification, attach that specification to an asset, and then populate the specification.